famous encyclical on climate change and global inequality, a powerful support for local social justice movements. I was actually reading it on the train coming up from Wagga yesterday, and I recommend it. It is beautifully written. I'm not quite sure of the correct pronunciation of it, but it's an open letter to the world on care for our common home, an encyclical letter on ecology and climate. So we have two terrific speakers tonight. I'll introduce Paul Collins. Paul Collins is a historian and writer, a Catholic priest for 32 years. He resigned from active priestly ministry in 2001 due to a dispute with the Vatican over his book Papal Power. He is the author of 14 books, the most recent of which being The Birth of the West, published in 2013, and A Very Contrary Irishman, published last year. He is well known as a commentator in the media on Catholicism and the papacy. He also has a strong interest in the environment, ethics and population issues. He has a master's degree in theology from Harvard University and a PhD in history from the Australian National University. He's published 2 books on the environmental crisis, God's Earth and Testament. So please welcome Paul Collins.
Virginia and I used to work together on Compass. She was a producer on Compass, so we've known each other for a long time. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming out. I was going to say on a cold night, it might be by Sydney standards a bit on the cold side, but I come from Canberra, and down there it's frigid, and it's not just the politics. Now, for the first time, I have to admit, I'm up here praising a pope. Normally, I'm up here saying, well now, this guy was a good guy, but tonight it'll be a little less equivocal. There will be few buts. There are only 2 buts, and I'm bringing them in at the end. Now, I want to start by saying that Laudato si mi signore, it's actually in the medieval Tuscan dialect. It's not Latin, it's the medieval Tuscan dialect in which St. Francis of Assisi wrote that magnificent cosmic hymn of praise, which we call All Creatures of Our God and King. It's a very loose translation of St. Francis, but that's the hymn we sing. And it simply means, praise you, my Lord, and the Lord in this case is, of course, God. Now, Laudato Si is probably the most comprehensive document that's been issued by really any pope. And there have been 265 of them, give or take a few. And it is addressed not just to Catholics, it is addressed to everyone on the planet about care for our common home, as he says. But it's a comprehensive document because it actually challenges the whole structure of modern life and culture. But it also challenges, it's the kind of modern life and culture stuff that people have picked up. What people have not picked up on, that it also challenges deeply, deeply held and long held Christian traditions and beliefs. Francis is in a way a revolutionary. He's described by the young Italian theologian Massimo Fagioli as a cultural revolutionary, is how he describes it. Well, a French thinker, the sociologist and philosopher Edgar Morin, says that Laudato Si challenges us to rethink our society from the bottom up. Now, what's tended to happen is that people have focused on Francis' repudiation of much of the politics of the contemporary world, particularly democratic politics, but not just democratic politics. His repudiation of much of the economics that underlies our whole culture. There is a most interesting discussion, a highly critical discussion of technology in the encyclical. It's an encyclical that questions capitalist theory, particularly neo-rationalist economics. It attacks denialist rhetoric, the kind of rhetoric which says, oh well, global warming, well, it's a matter of belief. No, it's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of fact. I don't care that 10% or 5% or however many percent of people say that it's not happening. I'm smart enough to actually believe all the people who actually know something about it, climate scientists, who say it is happening. And I'll cop it from them because they actually know what they're talking about. So that he attacks that denialist rhetoric, he attacks short-term politics, and he attacks the lack of vision of the leadership cadre that controls our lives, not only in democratic countries but in non-democratic countries as well. One does not have to go very far when one lives in Canberra to see a lack of vision. A total, utter, complete lack of vision. And I'm reminded of it every time I look down Anzac Parade across the lake to Parliament, as they used to say in the Victorian era. I'm afraid for all the postmodernists, while he doesn't name you, you don't come out of it very well. Now, what I think people have, that's all I think been relatively reasonably covered by the media in their commentary on Laudato Si. But what a lot of people have missed, and this takes us to both philosophy and theology, what people have missed is his radical questioning of human dominance over nature. He radically questions that the world exists for us alone, as though the universe, the cosmos, had been hanging around for however long, hoping that it might derive some sense of meaning from somebody, sometime, somewhere. Francis radically questions human dominance over nature, and he reintegrates humankind back into the biological matrix from which we first emerged by emphasizing the connectedness of all reality. And in this, he's not being too revolutionary, because he's actually drawing on and in fact quotes the Christian mystics who have understood this right from the beginning. He quotes St. John of the Cross, perhaps the most articulate of all the mystics, the great Spanish lyric poet and mystic of the 16th century. He quotes St. John of the Cross saying that St. John of the Cross says all things are God. And what he means by that is that all things are manifestations of the transcendent. All things, and not just humans, all things palpitate with a sense of something beyond them. I talk to lots of environmentalists, and I do a lot of bushwalking myself. And that's one of the great advantages of living in Canberra, because you can get to the bush pretty quickly. But what you start to perceive in the world, I remember in Hobart one time talking to probably the man, he and his partner, the two of them are probably the two people, the man and the woman, who have seen most of parts of Tasmania that probably very few people besides the Aboriginal people have ever seen. They're both tremendously strong bushwalkers. And he said to me, you know, it is amazing when you go out there and there is this sense of presence in the natural world, this sense of something that transcends you. Now, this guy had not done a course in theology. He was a decent, sensible, secular Australian. He wasn't some religious nutter. And so people can perceive this. We can all perceive that sense of presence. So he quotes St. John of the Cross saying, all things are God. there is a wonderful quote from St. Thomas Aquinas, who says, "Omnia creatura demonstrat personam patris." So check your Latin, it's pretty easy. Omnia creatura, all creatures, not just us, all creatures, demonstrat, show forth the personam patris, the personhood of the Father, the personhood of God, is what he's saying. So this is not some new doctrine that Francis dreamt up. It's just a neglected document that the Catholic Church and the Christian churches generally, I might say, have forgotten. But Francis is not just a kind of a revolutionary, he's also a smart politician. You'll be pleased to know. Not in the New South Wales upper house. He'd probably be better trained, that's very refined up there, I know, but better trained in the bear pit downstairs. That's where, because he's in the bear pit now. It's called the Vatican. And he's got George Pell. Francis is a shrewd politician, because what he also does in this encyclical is he places himself in the tradition of the papal tradition of commenting on the environment. And there's been a kind of a movement toward the environment among the last three popes. Paul VI, John Paul II, that benighted gentleman, and Benedict XVI. Benedict XVI was actually pale green. He wouldn't have signed up for the Greens, but he would have been slightly to the left of the Labour Party. That's where he'd be on the environment. Where Francis has taken us is he's gone to the left of the Greens.
There is such a space?
Is there any space? I don't know. Will you be the world expert on that? So I'm going to believe it. Now, the other thing that Francis does is he's deeply ecumenical, by which he recognises what other people have contributed. And one person that he singles out for special mention, and this man deserves to be singled out, is the Patriarch of the Orthodox churches, Patriarch Bartholomew. And I'll call him Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. I know it's called Istanbul now, but for anyone who's going, when I used to say that on the ABC, people would ring up and say, he doesn't know that, Constantinople's become Istanbul. I do know that, but he is the Patriarch of Constantinople. And Bartholomew has been very good on this, because he's done an enormous amount of practical work about down the estuary of the Danube, which is polluted to buggery. Bartholomew has been talking about environmental destruction as sin. Now, sin's a great word. I'm a firm believer in using it regularly. I was launching a policy for the Wilderness Society in Parliament House in Canberra on one occasion. And we had a whole row of, scientists sitting there, and one scientist said, well, I support the Wilderness Society's forest policy because of, the hung glider or the whatever, and the scientists can they get tedious. And they forget that the media need a story. And we had quite a lot of very top media people were there, some pretty important people from the Parliamentary Press Gallery, and I could see them gradually, sinking in further. So I thought, I've got to get attention. So I got up and I said, well, I'd remembered that I'd had some very nasty letters from loggers when I had said that logging old growth forest was a sin in a book of mine, God's Earth, back in 1995. So I thought, hey, let's have a try at this. So I said, I'm here because logging old growth forests, destroying old growth forests is a sin. Immediately attention, you see, because people love a sin. And I then let my mouth run away with me, and I said, it's worse than adultery, but not half as interesting. So I was quoted in most of the dailies. I don't think I made it to the Australian. Bartholomew says environmentalism, destruction of the environment is a sin, and Francis picks that up and runs with it. So we've got an eighth deadly sin now. So that's what it is. Now, one of the most interesting discussions in Laudato Si is his critique of technology. Now, this I never expected. It's interesting. I was in Ireland in April before the encyclical came out, and I was talking to Sean McDonough, who was one who contributed a large amount to this encyclical, particularly the section on biodiversity. And Sean was scared that they were going to drop that section on biodiversity. They didn't. It's actually quite strong on biodiversity. But the thing that that left me gobsmacked, to tell you the truth, is the critique of technology. And it's a very sophisticated critique of technology. Now, I think I know who wrote that bit of the encyclical. See, he didn't write the whole thing himself. They put it out and then they kind of tidy it up and, and actually, it is, like most of his documents, they're not well edited. As someone who writes books, you look for good editing, and it's not there. But anyway, I think the bloke who wrote this section is a guy in Rome named Ravasi, Cardinal Ravasi. He is the Pontifical Council for Culture. Now, while Francis is no techno-Luddite, he does mount a profound critique of technology, which sounds very much like the critique mounted by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger in his essay on technology in 1954. In fact, as I was reading it, I thought, this is Heidegger straight out. But he actually never quotes Heidegger. He quotes a bloke named Romano Guardini, who, despite his Italian name, grew up and lived all his life in Germany and taught at the University of Munich for most of his life. And Guardini, who actually knew Heidegger, so the ideas were around in this period, Guardini really sees technology as cutting us off from nature, creating an artificial, abstract, one-dimensional, depersonalized world. And you actually only have to look at what technology does to us. People now relate through technology. There is a South Australian artist, this is the most brilliant, one of the most brilliant things about this. The South Australian artist, and she asked me, she lives on what's the name of it? Kangaroo Island. And I went over there to launch one of her exhibitions. And there is a painting she has of this beach scene with this massive kangaroo. It dominates the entire picture. And these two little human stick figures over on the side. And both of them are taking pictures of each other. In other words, we have become so besotted with the technology that we actually don't we don't see the towering presence that dominates the whole horizon. And I see people take pictures of scenes, but they never actually look at the scene. That's I think the kind of thing that they're trying to get at. Heidegger puts it, he says, what has happened to us is that, he uses this German word Gestell, we enframe reality, is what he means. We have ways of enframing reality. We kind of pass reality through sieves and we interpret it. And Heidegger says that what has happened to us, what technology has done, it has created this frame of reference that sees nature as purely objective, as use, as something that we use, and its entire value is derived from that. As Heidegger says, how we think is much more important than what we think. And I think that's extremely important. Now, I do want to just mention two other things before I'll finish with my critique of this encyclical, because I don't think it's perfect. because after all it's by a pope, and I don't know a perfect pope yet.
Off with his head.
That's right. I think two other issues stand out. And it's the issue that I touched on at the beginning, and that is that he confronts Christian anthropocentrism. The way in which we are, as the great thinker Thomas Berry says, besotted with the pathos of the human. We are besotted, I'm getting like Tony Abbott now, we are besotted with the pathos of the human. The only difference between him and I is that he's got nothing more to say. That was very cruel. And it's very interesting to have a pope say this. The Christian churches, part of their problem, and it's going to be, I mean, I haven't mentioned social justice because John, I think, is the person to speak about that. And the kind of getting together of social justice and environmental concerns is absolutely central, and it certainly runs right through this encyclical. But what is interesting is that he has moved Christian theology beyond this endless preoccupation with the human. And the other thing is that he calls for an environmental conversion. Now, I reckon if you're green, if you really care about the natural world, you have been through a conversion. Because you've seen something and it's had an impact on you. And that's, in a way, what a conversion is. You've experienced something profoundly, and that has changed you. And I was on Compass a couple of weeks ago with Paul Kelly, the gentleman from the Australian, and he said, I have no idea what this that's rubbish, environmental conversion. And I said, well, I said to him afterwards, I think I did say on there, but it was edited out, but I afterwards said to him, mate, you can say that because you've never experienced it. You know, there really is a sense in which you need to experience that kind of biological connectedness with the whole cosmos. Now, I want to finish by just pointing to two problems that I have with Laudato Si. The first is the denial of the population problem. You live in cloud cuckoo land if you don't think we have a problem with large numbers of people on the earth. Never, ever before in the whole of history have we had so many people. Now, it's an intractable, difficult problem, probably only solved by the education and liberation of women, as has been pointed out by on countless times. And that's my second problem. He then gets into a bit of a diatribe on reproductive health. Now, of course, he's doing that because he knows, this is the politician, that the Philippines bishops have just lost a battle with the Philippines government on this very question of reproductive health. And he knows that he could lose some friends among the Africans, to put it mildly, if he were to support population health. But you see, it really does take us back to the Catholic Church's patriarchal preoccupations and its failure to understand the role of women in society. And I attribute that to our friend Francis, just as much as I would attribute it to George Pell. It's the clerical mind cannot grasp this. The celibate clerical mind can't get it. That they can't get, because they're not in touch, they're not in contact with the kind of level of intimacy that that close personal relationship involves. They're not in contact with a world that is different to them, that is the world, the feminine world, and they just don't get it about reproductive health. And I think that is a tragedy. They're two tragedies, and they're they're intimately interconnected. I would just simply say, in conclusion, because I think I've talked far too much, is that if you want to read more of what I think about it, I have done a quite detailed essay on it on my webpage. And my webpage is www. Now I love this because I did it purposely just to annoy some people. I call it www.oneWordPaulCollinsCatholicWriter.com.au. But I'm getting my name in there as a Catholic writer because I own being a Catholic. I am, and it has formed me and made me. I don't think we're right on everything, for God's sake, I don't. And it's quite humiliating sometimes to be a Catholic these days, especially in the media. But there it is, paulcollinscatholicwriter.com.au, and I also have an article on his views on technology in Eureka Street. If you just look up Eureka Street in Google, you'll get it. Anyway, there you are, and I'm going to hand you over to John, who's going to give us the good word from the upper house.